It's easy to think of the Ku Klux Klan as a relic, an ugly footnote in American history. White robes, burning crosses, and grainy footage of hate-fueled rallies. Most assume it died with the Civil Rights era, but hate rarely disappears, it reinvents. Beneath the growl of Harley engines and the leather-bound brotherhood of motorcycle clubs, a sinister evolution was unfolding. One that would fuse biker rebellion with white supremacist rage. This is the story of how America's oldest hate group traded its robes for cuts and created a new threat on two wheels. The Ku Klux Klan bikers. Dennis Michael McGiffen didn't start out with a mission. He drifted through his youth in the American Midwest, rootless, disillusioned, angry. And like so many who feel abandoned by society, he found purpose in hate. By the time he reached his 30s, McGiffen had climbed the ranks of the KKK, becoming a Grand Dragon, a regional leader in a decaying organization clinging to outdated rituals. To McGiffen, the Klan's parades and midnight meetings were performative, nostalgic pageantry with no teeth. He wanted revolution, not ceremony. Inspired by white supremacist terror groups from the 1980s and radical literature like the Turner Diaries, McGiffen broke away. In the early 1990s, he formed his own faction, the New Order, a militant cell committed not to propaganda, but to action. They weren't burning crosses, they were studying bomb-making, hoarding weapons, and plotting attacks on infrastructure and minority communities. They didn't want attention, they wanted destruction. In 1998, the FBI struck. Multiple raids, weapons, explosives, detailed attack plans. McGiffen went down on federal weapons charges and served 7 years. But prison didn't weaken him, it sharpened his strategy. Inside prison walls, McGiffen studied the dynamics of power. He observed how outlaw motorcycle clubs operated, how patches earned loyalty, how ranks bred obedience, how image shaped perception. Biker gangs, he noticed, moved through society with more freedom than the Klan ever could. A man in robes raised alarms. A biker in leather? That was Americana. Dangerous maybe, but not necessarily political. He also networked with Aryan prison gangs, learning how they recruited, how they ran operations, and how they kept loyalty strong. When McGiffen walked out of prison in 2004, he wasn't just a free man. He was an ideologue with a plan. For years, he stayed quiet, attending biker events, rebuilding ties. And when his parole ended in 2010, he was ready. That same year, McGiffen unveiled his new creation, the Sadistic Souls Motorcycle Club. But insiders knew them by another name, the Ku Klux Klan bikers. This wasn't just a biker club that happened to be racist. It was a hate group built to look like a biker club. The vests were real, the bikes were real, the brotherhood was real. But so was the ideology, Klan values dressed in leather and chrome. The patches were coded, SS bolts, 88, and other white supremacist signals known only to the initiated. Their colors, black and silver, paid tribute to both biker culture and Nazi aesthetics. This time, McGiffen wouldn't make the same mistakes. He stayed just within the boundaries of legality. No public plots, no bombs, just parades of bikes rumbling through minority neighborhoods. A new form of intimidation, louder, faster, mobile, and most dangerously, they were recruiting. The Ku Klux Klan bikers didn't post on forums or wave Confederate flags at rallies. They showed up to bar nights, charity rides, veterans events, and they brought with them a message of belonging, brotherhood, freedom, identity. In forgotten towns crushed by job losses and addiction, that message resonated. They never opened with race. Prospects were drawn in by the bikes, the parties, the image. Only after they were invested did the ideology emerge, masked as heritage, disguised as pride. This slow radicalization worked. By the time recruits learned the truth, they were already wearing the colors. By 2011, they had chapters in 5 states, and their runs through diverse towns began to stir fear. Officially, they were just another MC. Unofficially, they were white power on wheels. In 2012, another white supremacist group came knocking, the Aryan Nations, once America's most feared neo-Nazi organization. But since the death of founder Richard Butler, it had splintered into factions. One of those factions, led by Morris Gullett in Louisiana, saw McGiffen's Klan bikers as the key to revitalization. A deal was struck. They merged. The new name? Aryan Nations Sadistic Souls, MC. At first it worked. Membership surged. Chapters spread. The blend of Nazi history and biker mystique drew in young men like never before. But beneath the surface, cracks were already forming. McGiffen the showman wanted public intimidation and high-profile events. Gullett, the ideologue, believed in secrecy and indoctrination. Their leadership styles clashed. Their organizations didn't mesh. Biker recruits scoffed at Aryan Nation purity tests. Aryan Nations members mocked the bikers as undisciplined and reckless. By 2013, events meant to unify them exposed the rift. Members stayed in separate camps. Arguments broke out over strategy and ideology. The merger was a disaster waiting to happen. It exploded in late 2013. Gullett went public, accusing McGiffen's bikers of disgraceful behavior, drinking, fighting, and, worst of all, fraternizing with minorities. He posted pictures of Sadistic Souls members flipping the bird and partying, labeling them a disgrace to the Aryan cause. McGiffen hit back, questioning Gullett's leadership, calling him a relic clinging to a failed past. Their followers took sides. The once unified group was torn in two. Both men tried to control the narrative. Each claimed the other betrayed white nationalism. The result was chaos. Chapters split. Resources vanished. Members fled. Some left the movement entirely. Others joined rival factions. For McGiffen, it was a huge blow. The Aryan Nations name had brought legitimacy, and now it was gone. Worse, Gullett launched a personal smear campaign, releasing photos of McGiffen's family with non-white individuals, claiming his son had a child with a woman of Indian descent. In a movement built on racial purity, this was devastating, but McGiffen wasn't done. In 2014, he launched a new vision, the Black and Silver Solution, a coalition of white nationalist biker clubs and hate groups working together while retaining independence. Black for the robes, silver for the steel. A color scheme rooted in both Klan history and biker style. The Ku Klux Klan bikers would be the face, the visible arm of the coalition. They'd ride, they'd recruit, they'd show strength in public. Meanwhile, other groups in the coalition would handle literature, online propaganda, and indoctrination. Their first major test came in 2015 with a coordinated flyer drop across 5 states. Riders tossed weighted plastic bags containing racist literature onto suburban lawns. Thousands of homes hit in a single night. It was old-school Klan tactics delivered with biker efficiency, and it worked. The media coverage amplified their message. Police struggled to catch them, and in the white nationalist underground, McGiffen was back on the map. By 2016, the Ku Klux Klan bikers had become a model for modern extremism. No longer just a hate group, not quite a biker gang, something more dangerous, a hybrid. They rode in plain sight. They masked their hate behind brotherhood. They understood media, marketing, and manipulation. And most importantly, they adapted. Where old hate groups failed, they evolved. Law enforcement continues to monitor their chapters. Community groups continue to protest their presence. But the threat remains, not just because of who they are, but because of how they've learned to hide. In the end, this isn't just a story about one man or one club. It's a warning about how hate doesn't always wear a hood. Sometimes it wears a helmet. Sometimes it rides a Harley. And sometimes it shakes your hand before it shows its teeth. This is the modern face of extremism, fueled by the past, dressed for the present, and riding toward a dangerous future. The Ku Klux Klan bikers weren't just riding for the thrill, they were riding for conquest. By the late 2000s and 10s, they'd perfected the formula. Show up, ride through town, pass out flyers, host an event, and leave behind a few new recruits. It was a method that allowed them to expand rapidly while avoiding traditional pitfalls. Their targets were always the same: economically vulnerable communities, places with lost factories, closed mills, shuttered mines, towns with rising addiction rates and declining hope. McGiffen knew despair was fertile ground for extremism. In these places, the Klan bikers offered not just ideology, but identity. They offered scapegoats for complex problems: immigrants, minorities, globalists, Jews, and gave disaffected white men a uniform, a mission, and a myth to believe in. It was emotional warfare disguised as brotherhood. They weren't just preaching racism, they were selling belonging. This, more than anything, made them dangerous. So what really happens behind those steel clubhouse doors? Some say it's just beer, bikes, and brotherhood. Others say it's weapons, stockpiles, trafficking plans, and blood oaths. The truth likely lies somewhere in the middle. Meetings called church were sacred. Business was discussed. Votes were taken. Loyalty was tested. There were ranks: president, vice president, sergeant-at-arms, and so on. Violations of code could lead to fines, beatings, or expulsion. Every new recruit was put through a prospecting phase: menial tasks, background checks, loyalty tests. Only after months of proving themselves would they earn the patch. But beneath the surface, a darker world thrived. Weapons caches, drug routes, acts of intimidation, even rumors of contract enforcement and targeted violence. Much of it was technically deniable. The leadership, McGiffen included, had learned to keep their hands clean. But violence was part of the DNA. Whether through standoffs at biker rallies, fights in bars, or firebombed homes of minorities, the message was clear: we are here and you are not welcome. By 2017, the Ku Klux Klan bikers were no longer just a novelty. They were one of the fastest growing white nationalist organizations in the country. They became a fixture at far-right rallies, often arriving in formation, faces covered, riding in tight formation. They'd park their bikes near protest lines and rev their engines. A wall of sound meant to drown out opposition. Counter-protesters began warning each other: if you see the black and silver patch, leave. In cities like Charlottesville, Louisville, and Tulsa, their presence was noted by journalists and civil rights groups alike. They weren't the biggest group, but they were among the most intimidating. Their tactics were designed not just for show, but for escalation. Their hope? To provoke conflict, to draw in media, to present themselves as victims of liberal chaos. This tactic often worked. In the online echo chambers where extremism festers, footage of scuffles became propaganda. They weren't just fighting for white rights. They were defending America from socialism, immigration, multiculturalism, and Jewish influence. McGiffen understood that the future of hate wasn't just on the road, it was online. Starting in 2017, the Ku Klux Klan bikers launched an aggressive digital campaign. But they didn't flood platforms with obvious swastikas or hate speech. They played smarter. Their videos featured fast cuts, moody music, and biker footage, often overlaid with patriotic imagery: eagles, flags, battlefields. The voiceovers were vague but ominous, talking about lost American values, forgotten men, the need for resistance. At first glance, these looked like generic alt-right media, but the dog whistles were loud if you knew what to listen for. References to bloodlines, heritage, Zog, Zionist-occupied government, and quotes from white supremacist leaders embedded in video titles. They used coded hashtags and layered symbolism to avoid bans. They spread their message through encrypted chats, Telegram channels, and even gaming servers. And in each case, they played the long game, drawing curious young men in with memes, then gradually radicalizing them with historical revisionism and conspiracy theories. They were no longer just riding through neighborhoods. They were riding through minds. The Ku Klux Klan bikers, like most outlaw MCs, were a male-dominated world. But behind every chapter was a support crew of women: wives, girlfriends, sympathizers. Some played passive roles, cooking, organizing events, or acting as alibis. But others were far more involved. There were old ladies who ran safe houses, property of women who served as lookouts, female associates who transported drugs or weapons to avoid suspicion. One particularly notorious figure was known only as Mama Bones, a former prison nurse turned logistics chief who allegedly coordinated the movement of firearms between Oklahoma, Missouri, and Arkansas chapters. She never wore a patch, but insiders said she knew more about club operations than most full-patch members. The FBI began taking note. Women were less visible, less suspected, and often more loyal. In many ways, they were the secret backbone of the movement. The Ku Klux Klan bikers weren't just at war with society, they were also at odds with other outlaw motorcycle clubs. Traditional biker gangs like the Mongols, the Pagans, and the Outlaws generally avoided explicit political ideology. They were about business, territory, and survival. They didn't want the heat that white nationalism brought. In some towns, Sadistic Souls MC chapters were warned to stay away. In others, there were fights, stabbings, and even drive-by shootings linked to turf disputes. But McGiffen's crew was growing, and they weren't afraid of stepping on toes. Their white supremacist ideology gave them a sense of divine mission, a belief that they were doing more than just moving product or controlling a block. They were reclaiming America. This created friction. In places like Kansas City, Little Rock, and rural Mississippi, local MCs clashed with them, sometimes violently. The FBI even noted increasing crossover between hate crimes and biker turf wars, blurring the line between ideology and organized crime. The Ku Klux Klan bikers had caught the attention of federal authorities long before the black and silver solution was announced. But by 2018, the threat was being taken seriously. The FBI's domestic terrorism unit began treating them not just as a hate group, but as a hybrid threat, part gang, part extremist network. The ATF tracked their gun pipelines. DHS flagged them in anti-radicalization briefings. Local police began receiving special training on identifying coded biker symbols, tattoo meanings, and hate group connections. Sting operations followed. Clubhouses were raided, weapons seized, informants flipped, but arrests were hard to come by. McGiffen had learned from his past. Never say anything on tape, never order anything directly, and never get your hands dirty. Instead, violence was franchised. Acts of arson, beatings, threats. They were done by hang-arounds and prospects acting on winks and nudges, not orders. One senior DOJ official called them the hardest white supremacist network to prosecute in America. As of 2025, the Ku Klux Klan bikers remain a looming threat, not because they're huge, but because they're invisible in plain sight. They've mastered adaptation. When law enforcement cracks down, they lay low. When media shifts focus, they reemerge. When platforms ban them, they create new accounts. Slicker, subtler, smarter. They've even made inroads into police departments and military units, capitalizing on shared aesthetics, flags, skulls, slogans, to blur the line between patriotism and extremism. They don't need to be the largest. They just need to be the most persistent. And they are. This is no longer the clan of your grandfather's nightmares. This is a clan that rides Harleys, uses Instagram, and hands out toys to children. Then burns a cross in the woods by midnight. It wears leather, not linen. It hides behind free speech and patriotic imagery. It knows the law and how to skirt it. It recruits in bars, jails, chat rooms, and forgotten towns. And most chilling of all, it's not fading. It's evolving. As long as there are men like McGiffen willing to reinvent hate and wrap it in something new, America will never be safe from its oldest ghost. The Ku Klux Klan may have taken off the hood, but the poison underneath still rides. Absolutely. Bikers in the black and silver solution, focusing on internal training, propaganda pipelines, international connections, law enforcement infiltration, and the psychological profile of members. This section also begins laying the groundwork for how the group has tried to influence elections and public institutions. The black and silver solution wasn't just a loose coalition, it became a training ground, a place where white supremacists could not only find a home, but be shaped into ideological soldiers. McGiffen understood the value of indoctrination. Behind the clubhouse doors and beneath the sound of revving engines, members were subjected to what some former insiders described as structured radicalization. It began subtly. New members, often still prospects, would be handed a copy of the Turner Diaries or Siege. These texts weren't labeled as required reading, but they were treated with reverence. Senior members would quote passages in meetings or bring up scenarios that mirrored scenes from the books. asking things like, "What would you do if the government came for your guns?" Members who responded with militant or defiant answers were praised. Those who hesitated were tested further. Eventually, everyone knew what answer was expected. Beyond literature, the club ran physical survival and weapons training weekends, often disguised as brotherhood camps. In remote wooded areas of Missouri, Kentucky, and Arkansas, small groups of patch members and recruits would learn marksmanship, tactical formations, and urban escape techniques. Some drills simulated attacks on government facilities or civil unrest scenarios. Others taught members how to resist arrest, erase digital footprints, or spot undercover agents. It was extremism with a soldier's discipline. The message was clear. They weren't just a motorcycle club. They were building an army. By 2016, McGiffen's crew had built a full-blown media wing. Known internally as Signal Corps, it was run by a younger generation of members skilled in video editing, coding, and digital strategy. These weren't the typical roughneck bikers. They were college dropouts, disillusioned veterans, and tech-savvy isolationists who believed the movement had gone soft. Together, they created a sophisticated propaganda pipeline. On the surface, it was all legal. Videos of rallies, motorcycle rides, and speeches overlaid with patriotic music and Second Amendment quotes. But underneath, it was all dog whistles and coded language. They built websites that appeared to be generic conservative news outlets, but subtly pushed white nationalist talking points. They seeded online forums with conspiracy theories tying immigration to national collapse, and they built encrypted communication tools so members could coordinate across state lines without leaving digital fingerprints. Perhaps most dangerously, they created a digital manual, a 50-page PDF called the American Warrior Manifesto. It wasn't circulated publicly. Instead, it was shared through closed channels to prospects who had passed multiple vetting layers. The manual combined KKK ideology with tactical instructions, historical revisionism, and apocalyptic rhetoric. The final section outlined potential attack targets in case of national emergency, including news stations, power grids, and water treatment plants. In the wrong hands, it was a domestic terrorist playbook. It wasn't long before overseas hate groups took notice of McGiffen's hybrid model. In 2018, intelligence agencies in Canada and Germany flagged growing online interactions between members of the Ku Klux Klan bikers and extremist groups abroad, particularly a German neo-Nazi biker gang known as the Stahlkrieger, Steel Warriors. While international MCs had traditionally been disconnected from U.S. hate groups, the shared aesthetics, leather, chrome, rebellion, created common ground. Encrypted messages revealed plans to eventually host an international unity ride in Europe, connecting white nationalist biker gangs under a global brotherhood banner. Although the event never materialized thanks to travel restrictions and surveillance, the groundwork had been laid. McGiffen's crew also drew interest from white nationalist groups in South Africa, Eastern Europe, and even Brazil, where far-right militias were looking to emulate American-style rebellion. Through a combination of digital outreach and ideological synergy, the Ku Klux Klan bikers were exporting their brand of hate, one motorcycle at a time. Another major shift occurred in 2019. The Ku Klux Klan bikers and the broader Black and Silver solution set their sights on something more ambitious: infiltrating civic institutions. They didn't need to win national elections. They just needed to plant seeds in local soil. Their strategy was subtle but effective. A handful of members ran for small-town offices, city council, school board, county commission. Most didn't run openly as members of the biker club or as white nationalists. Instead, they used generic slogans: protect our values, faith, family, freedom, or back the blue. In districts with low voter turnout, this was often enough. One member in Tennessee, a former club prospect who had cleaned up his public image, won a seat on the local school board. Over the next 2 years, he voted against diversity initiatives, pushed for removal of certain history texts, and blocked funding for ESL programs. In rural Indiana, a chapter supporter was elected sheriff, and reports later surfaced that he had looked the other way during biker events involving hate speech and intimidation. By 2021, watchdog groups were tracking dozens of local office holders with ties to white nationalist organizations, many with indirect connections to the Ku Klux Klan bikers. They weren't just shouting from the fringes anymore. They were sitting at the table. What drives someone to join the Ku Klux Klan bikers? It's not always hate, at least not at first. Psychologists who have studied former members describe a recurring pattern: isolation, disillusionment, identity crisis. Many recruits were men in their 20s and 30s who had lost jobs, relationships, or purpose. Some were veterans struggling with reintegration. Others were felons unable to find legitimate work. The club offered them structure, camaraderie, a sense of meaning, and once inside, it slowly reshaped their worldview, replacing uncertainty with certainty and doubt with dogma. Prospects were often tested through humiliation rituals, being forced to clean bikes with toothbrushes, sleep in sheds, or take beatings without complaint. These tests weren't just for fun. They were meant to break the old self and create someone new. One defector described it as a cult on wheels. "I didn't join because I hated black people," he said. "I joined because I felt like I didn't belong anywhere." They gave me a family, and then they gave me someone to blame. Surprisingly, religion played a role, but not in the way many expected. While older forms of Klan ideology were steeped in a distorted version of Christianity, McGiffen's crew leaned into a more militant blend, a fusion of Christian identity, Norse mythology, and apocalyptic prophecy. Some chapters held ceremonies where members invoked both Jesus and Odin, casting themselves as warriors in a spiritual battle for the white race. They used scripture selectively, quoting obscure verses to justify violence, segregation, and white dominion. A popular belief within some chapters was that the end times were near, and that the collapse of multicultural society would be the beginning of a white spiritual rebirth. The faith, like the movement, was fractured and contradictory, but it served a purpose. It made the mission feel divine. Despite their growth, the Ku Klux Klan bikers were not unchecked. Local communities pushed back. Civil rights organizations tracked their movements. Antifa cells disrupted their events. Journalists exposed their hidden identities. Law enforcement infiltrated their ranks. In one notable case in Kentucky, an undercover officer spent 14 months embedded as a prospect. He recorded conversations, mapped safe houses, and documented plots to intimidate Hispanic neighborhoods. In 2020, his evidence led to a federal indictment of 18 members on weapons and racketeering charges. In another case, a black church in Alabama filed a civil lawsuit after being targeted by biker intimidation raids. The footage made national news, and sponsors for some of the biker events pulled out, cutting off revenue streams. Each time they were exposed, the club doubled down on secrecy. They moved meeting locations, enforced stricter codes, and rotated leadership to prevent surveillance. But the pressure was mounting. As the black and silver solution enters the mid-2020s, its future remains uncertain. McGiffen, now pushing 60, is still considered the spiritual leader. But younger members are rising, many more tech-literate and less bound by traditional Klan values. Some whisper about a rebrand. Others suggest a pivot away from biker culture altogether, moving into paramilitary groups or digital-only collectives. But one thing is clear: the hate has not disappeared. It has mutated. It wears new symbols. It speaks in code. It rides under the radar, but it still burns with the same fire. If you found this story important, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more untold stories from the dark corners of our world, and share this video to help expose what others want to keep hidden.